A few years ago in Chile, a pastor made me this staff to remind me of my responsibility as a shepherd or pastor for children. But I keep it in my office to remind me that God is my shepherd. He is the good shepherd, and He is always leading me, and I need to follow Him even when it seems difficult or when there are obstacles along the way. I need to be willing to follow Him no matter what. There is a verse in Revelation that where God Himself says, "When I open a door, no one can close it. And when I close a door, no one can open it." So we need to trust that when God sets a direction before us, when He calls us to be obedient in something, we need to be able to follow, knowing that He is going before us and He is behind us and He is opening that door for us. No matter what we see, we need to be able to follow Him and be obedient in that thing. So I want to go through some of the things that you might see along the way in that place of obedience. My wife always says to me, when you go on this next trip, don't be distracted. Don't look to the left or the right. Keep your eyes on the mission, the purpose, what God has called you to do. And out of that, here are some things that I've kind of learned along the way. And I just want to pass it on and encourage you as you walk in obedience before God. Listen to this verse from Deuteronomy 31, verse 8. The first part of it says, "The Lord Himself goes before you, and He will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you." Wow, we love that verse. God is going to go with me. He is in front of me and behind me. He's always with me and will never leave me. We love that thought. But the second part of this verse reminds us of what's going to happen along the way, even though He's with us. The second part of it says, "So do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Why did He say that? Because there might be some things along the way to be afraid about. There might be some scary things along the way. There may be some things that could discourage us. But He says, I'm with you. I'm in front of you and behind you. I'm never going to leave you. So whatever you see, whatever you experience, don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. I recently made a trip to Syria, and it was my second time going there. And as I arrived in Syria, got to the airport, and my host, who was coming from Syria into Beirut to meet me in Lebanon, I got off the airplane and there was no host. There was only a man standing there with my name on a piece of paper. And I was like, where are my friends? And I got to him and he dialed the phone and gave it to me, and it was my host saying, "Sorry, we can't get out of Syria. We don't have any fuel. We can't get there, but we've got a taxi driver for you and he's going to take you. We'll be there in a couple of hours. Just wait and we'll be there." So did that. A little uncomfortable, but that's not too bad. After a couple of hours, got a message on WhatsApp saying, "Yeah, there's been a big delay. We can't find fuel. We're not going to be there. Why don't you make your way to the border by yourself with this taxi driver who speaks no English, and I speak very little Arabic. My Arabic is terrible. Mish kwais awi, not very good at all. And so I'm making my way to the border, a little knot in my stomach. And he says, "Be sure to print out the visa pre-approval form." And he sent me a picture of it on WhatsApp. If you've ever tried to print something from a WhatsApp photo, I did. It was very blurry. The whole top part of the form and the bottom of this with the signatures was all missing. All I had was the center portion blurry. You could barely read it. But I took this blurry copy and I got in the taxi and we made our way toward the border where he was going to meet us. The closer we got to the border, I started getting messages. They still couldn't get out of Syria. And so he says, "Why don't you go ahead and try to go through the border by yourself?" And I'm thinking, I don't speak any of the language. now I'm having a bigger knot in my stomach. I'm not sure what to do exactly. And I don't know if there's enough information on this part of the visa approval. So I just go to the border. The taxi driver, we get out and go into the building. The taxi driver points at the right line, and I go and get in that line with my blurry copy and my passport and my no Arabic. And I walk up and when it's my turn, give the forms to the officer behind the counter there. And he looks at me, looks at the passport and the pre-approval form, and he's typing on his computer and he's talking to some friends and it's going back and forth, and the knot in my stomach is getting a little bigger. Have you ever felt that knot in your stomach? And so then finally they agree. They point me to another counter, which seems like a good thing because that's where you pay. So I went over and paid. They sent me back with a little receipt. I took it back to the original guy. He typed a little more, talked to friends, looked at me, looked at the paper and the passport a little more, and then you hear that beautiful sound, that chink, 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 when they stamp your passport, and you think, I'm in. And I get a message saying, why don't you go ahead and go to the location where we're going to be because we're not going to be able to get there in time. And I'm thinking, okay, we'll just keep traveling with this taxi driver. We're almost at the location. The taxi driver begins to signal. He's like asking me if I want a drink, if I want some tea. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. Anata, ma'am, I'm fine, really. He makes a phone call to my host and they talk a little. He passes the phone to me and says, he says you want to go to his house for tea. I'm like, no, not really. I don't even know this person. I don't even know if it's safe to go there. And he says, I think it will be a good idea. Why don't you go? So I said, okay. And we go off the road into this little village to his place, go in, have tea. His family and friends come to see this American here. And finally we go to the location and the host meets us. You see, God had opened a door for us to be able to get into Syria. And I knew that that was God's plan. But along the way, there were some things, there were opportunities for me to feel a bit alone and even discouraged and even a little bit afraid. Isaiah 41:10 says, so do not fear. Because there's going to be that opportunity to be afraid. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed. For I am your God, and I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So even as we're going along and we start feeling that anxiety and that fear and that discouragement, that feeling alone, we can't focus on that. We have to pay attention to the fact that God says he is with me. He's right here. I have to look at him and not at the circumstances. Sometimes we see kids checking in children's ministry, and they come running into church. They're with their parents. Everything seems fine. And then they go up to the little machine and they start checking in. And when that label prints out and they hear that sound, even the littlest ones, they know what that means. Mom and dad are going to go different directions, and there is some anxiety. And sometimes we see little kids holding on really tight, getting closer and closer to mom or dad, and they're like walking right beside them. We need to be doing the same thing. When we go into those situations and we know God is with us, he's called us to walk in this way, and we feel a little bit of anxiety or fear or discouragement, instead of paying attention to that, backing away and quitting, giving up, we need to just pull closer to Dad and say, you're with me. I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to walk with you through this situation. I'm not going to give up. In Isaiah 52:12, God says, as you go, you will not leave in haste. You're not going to run away fast. You're not going to go in flight, for the Lord will go before you. The God of Israel will be your rear guard. So God says, no need to panic. No need to be stressed. I'm here. We're going to walk through this. Even though you're feeling all this stuff and you're tempted to panic, you're tempted to get stressed, you have to say, Dad's here. I'm going to walk with him. He opened this door. He knows everything that's coming. I'm going to walk with him through this situation. Sometimes we say to kids, When you're standing in line at this giant roller coaster and you're watching people climb to this really high peak, and then they all scream as they're coming down, and you see them make a dip and they turn upside down and twist around. They're doing all this, and while you're standing in line, you're trying to smile, but there is a huge knot in your stomach and you're wondering, am I going to survive this? Should I even do it? Have you ever felt that? You get this knot in your stomach wondering, what am I going to do here? If you pay attention to that knot in your stomach and you get out of line, you will miss out on what's coming. And always you see kids who get in line, they go through the roller coaster ride and they're screaming along the way. And when they get off, what's the first thing they say when they get off of the ride? I want to do that again. That was so cool. It's a similar thing that happens to us when we're being obedient to God. Yes, you're going to have that knot in your stomach. You're going to be tempted to be a little bit stressed, and you're going to be tempted to panic or get discouraged or be afraid or feel like you're all alone. But you have to say, I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to be committed to this. I am not going to give up. I'm going to walk with my dad through this situation. And then once you do, you start to realize, wow, that was pretty cool. I'm so glad I didn't give up. Proverbs 4:25 says, let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. In Hebrews, it says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Pay attention to him. There's going to be opportunities for distractions, things that are going to happen around you that can tempt you into paying attention to them, getting your eyes off Jesus. Kind of like Peter when he was walking on water. He was distracted by the wind and the waves, got his eyes off of Jesus, and then began to feel that sinking feeling. So we are called to pay attention, not to the distractions, but pay attention to Jesus. First time I went to Syria, we were in Aleppo, and at night when the sun went down and you could begin to hear in the distance the mortar fire and some machine gun fire, and it's really easy to focus on that, and trying to go to sleep and hearing those sounds, you're kind of wondering, are they getting closer or are they going farther away? And beginning to get distracted by the thoughts that come. Instead of remembering, this is where God called me, I'm in the middle of his will, I'm in his hands. And so I had to put in those earplugs and say, no, I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going to be distracted by this. In a similar way, we have to do the same thing when we see distractions, when things are happening around us, when people are saying something trying to discourage us or distract us. We have to say, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to stay focused on what God called me to do. In Isaiah 45, verse 2, God says, I will go before you. And then he says, I'm going to level the mountains. I'm going to break down the gates of bronze. I'm going to cut through bars of iron. And that reminds me, there are going to be flat out obstacles along the way. There are going to be things that stop us. And it seems like this is the end. This is impossible. A decision was made and it seems like the doors are closed. And yet God called me to walk this way. What am I going to do? Am I going to quit and give up because the obstacle is there? Or I'm going to say, God, I'm trusting you to level this mountain, to break through these bars of iron. I'm going to trust you to break through this obstacle. God, I'm believing that you are walking with me, and I'm not going to be worried or concerned about this barrier or this obstacle. God, I am trusting you. And then Deuteronomy 1:30 reminds us there's going to be spiritual battles along the way. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you as he did for you in Egypt. Before your very eyes, God is going to do this. So there are going to be spiritual battles, but God is the one who's doing the battle. God is the one who's fighting for you. He's the one leading you. So as you walk and you're being obedient, you can see the whole list of things here that we'll be tempted to pay attention to. Yeah, that stuff is going to be there. And God tells us in advance that it's going to be there. In fact, Jesus in John 16:33. He says, I've told you all these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. See, Jesus is telling them all the stuff that's going to happen to them. And he says, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this so that when it happens, you'll have peace. I'm not sure that hearing all this stuff in advance gives me peace, but when it begins to happen and I get reminded that, wait a second, God warned us. He told us these things would happen. He said, when you see these things, don't be distracted. When you feel this way, don't give up. Don't panic. Don't be stressed. Don't be afraid. You're gonna feel all that stuff, see all that stuff, sense all that stuff. You're gonna be aware of all the problems around you, the obstacles and the challenges and the distractions, the spiritual battle. Yeah, you're gonna see all that stuff, but stick with me, stay near me. So when you see that stuff, you suddenly have confidence that God knows about this. He warned me in advance. The last time I went to China, we were teaching, and on the last day, police showed up, and we went. They took us into the hills. We were running, and we heard sirens. They were looking for us, and eventually arrested us, and then sent us out of the country. But during that whole process, there was an overwhelming peace, because before we even traveled, God reminded us in our prayer time. My wife and me and my co-worker, we all separately came to the same conclusion. This trip, we're going to meet the police. Something is going to happen this time, but don't be distracted. Don't be worried. God has you. He has called you. You're walking in the way He wants you to go. So when it began to happen, we all looked at each other and just said, here it is. This is what God said would happen. So as an act of our will, we decided we are not going to pay attention to this. And the peace of God was overwhelming. Even though there were plenty of opportunities to feel all of these ways and to worry about all that, we had to remember He is with us. And He's going to take care of us along the way. So I don't know what situation you're facing. I don't know what challenge or difficulty that's in front of you as you're being obedient, as you're raising your kids, as you're counseling, as you're teaching, as you're living your life and taking care of family and you're shepherding people, whatever your responsibility, and you're walking in that thing and you're seeing some of the challenges, some of the problems. Remember, God called you in this direction. He's with you. And no matter what you see or hear, He's there with you. Focus on Him. And so now read this passage from what David says in Psalm 139. We hear these words a lot, but now I want you to hear them differently. David is talking about how awesome God is and how God is involved in his life. In 139 verses 5 through 10, here's what he says. You hem me in. That's like you enclose me with your own presence. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too lofty for me to even understand. Because where could I go from your spirit? Where could I flee from your presence? You're always there. If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there also. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. No matter where I go, no matter what happens in my life, you are there with me. You're walking me through that. I don't need to be afraid. I don't need to be distracted or discouraged. I don't need to panic. I don't need to pay attention to the obstacles and the distractions and the spiritual battle around me. I need to keep my eyes on Dad. I need to follow the Good Shepherd. I need to stay close to Him. In fact, those things actually draw us closer to Him. They pull us into Him, and then we can say with confidence, you're my God, and I trust you, and my life is in your hands. I love that verse when David, in Psalms 31, I think it is, where he says, when he looks at all the stuff that's happening in his life, he says, you're my God, I trust you, my life is in your hands. And that's what we need to do as we walk along this way. He opened the door, we're going to walk in it, we're going to walk in faith. So don't give up. Don't panic. Keep walking, follow him.